Good evening, listeners. I am your host, Timothy, and you're tuned into the ghostly broadcast, Paranormal Station, where I beam out testimonies from around the world across the airwaves for all the world to hear. Those who labor by night are the unsung heroes of our day. Humans are not nocturnal creatures. Those who work the short hours of the night contend with the gruelling reality that it takes on their health and their sanity. But while many will only suffer the physical realities of night shift work, others are awake to witness the things that go bump in the night. We return to North America tonight to hear more testimonies from those whose work was interrupted by a brush with the unknown entities that haunt the night. Our first testimony comes from Natasha in New Hampshire. Dear Timothy, my name is Natasha, and I may as well come out and say it right off the bat. I used to work for a vampire. I even joked about it because I was essentially a night housemaid for this guy and his weird friends, but I never thought it would actually be true. Truth be told, I don't even really remember how I got the job. I don't remember applying for it or being interviewed for it. I just got up one night and showed up for work at his house. So what's this guy like? My friends would ask on the weekends I'd see them. The night shift had been taking its toll on me, but the money I was making made it worth it. Still, it was hard not to feel isolated from friends and family due to working odd hours. Well, he's rich. I can tell you that much. I think he's some kind of art dealer because he hosts a lot of parties for him and his friends, I explained. One night, around 3 or 4 in the morning, I was cleaning up the champagne glasses and trays of powder left out in the open, when my boss, Vic, rounded the corner in a robe. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Natasha," he said as he grabbed the tray from me. "It's okay, Vic. What you guys do in your house isn't my business," I said, and I meant it. Vic had been good to me. "What are you still doing here anyway?" he asked with genuine concern in his eyes. "There's still a lot to clean up," I told him. He put his hand on the glass I held, and his fingers brushed against mine. I felt butterflies in my stomach, and my heart skipped. He gazed into my eyes, and I felt so drawn to him at that moment that I felt my lips rising up to his as he looked at me with wanting eyes. "Don't worry about it," he eventually said softly. "Take the rest of the night and tomorrow off." I insist. "Oh, okay," I said, pulling away and feeling embarrassed. But I did as he said and didn't return until 2 nights later. When I returned to the house, it looked like utter carnage had occurred. There was blood all over the floor and walls. "Vic!" I called out. I found him lounging by the fire in his study with corpses at his feet. He turned calmly to face me, and I saw his eyes, cat-like and yellow, 2 pointed fangs in his teeth. I went to scream. "Stop," he ordered, and I froze still silently. He rose from his chair and strolled over to me. I was shaking and quivering, but I couldn't move or take my eyes off him. He cupped my chin with his thumb and index finger and raised my head to meet his gaze. "I'm so sorry you had to see this, Natasha. You've been very good to me," he said softly. I went to speak, but he shushed me. My heart was in my mouth and my stomach was dancing. His lips were so close to mine, and at that moment, I don't know why, but all I wanted was for him to kiss me. "I'd take you with me if I could," he whispered. "Take me, please," I pleaded, instinctually turning my neck to his face. I heard a low growl, and his top lip quivered into a slight snarl, but then he composed himself. "You're only saying that because I want you to say that," he said. He pulled my head down and kissed me on the forehead. When his lips touched me, I woke up in bed with the sunshine bursting into my room. I never saw Vic again. Yours, Natasha. Thank you for that incredible testimony, Natasha. There are creatures in this world that are predators, whether they like it or not. It is in their nature. No one, neither them nor anyone else, can deny it. Be thankful that whoever Vic was, he left you and your soul intact. Our next testimony comes from Samuel in Los Angeles. Dear Timothy, I'm Samuel, and I work security at a rehab center in LA. This isn't that kind of all-star treatment that the movie stars get, though. This is the bottom of the barrel, last chance saloon of rehab in the city. One night, I was watching the cameras and sipping terrible coffee when I noticed something. I've got cameras all over the inside of the facility, but only one that shows the outside. A downward view of the front gate. Standing in front of the gate was a man, disheveled and clad in tattered clothes. He was staring up at the camera, looking right at me. This wasn't the first time that something like this had happened. We'd had people leave the center of their own accord. Some people don't want to be helped, and we tend not to let them back in if we don't have the space. I figured this guy was just trying to get back in. I ignored him and made my rounds. 20 minutes later, I was back in the security room, and he was still standing there, looking at me through the camera. I leaned down and pressed the intercom button. "Can I help you, sir?" I asked. He didn't answer. I shrugged, ignored it, and sat down with my book, but I couldn't focus because this man stared at me the whole time. When it came time to make another patrol, I looked at him through the monitor. "Okay, what that fuck do you want?" I whispered. I headed straight for the main gate, rounded the courtyard and looked right at it, but the man was gone. "What the fuck?" I said to myself. "Hello?" I called out. No one answered. I headed back inside and carried on with my patrol. He, came a chuckle from one of the patients. "Looks like old Paulson's back," he chuckled maniacally. I shook my head and ignored them. It's not my job to interact with the patients. Only if they're a danger to themselves or the staff. I sat back down at the security monitors. The man was gone from the front gate, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Then suddenly, his face filled the screen of the front gate camera before the camera feed turned to static. Then every camera feed filled his face before breaking into static. I panicked, trying to reboot the monitoring system, but as soon as my fingers touched the controls, all of the power to the facility went out. It was pure chaos across the building. People in various states of recovery were going crazy. It took at least an hour for backup staff to arrive and the power to return. Thankfully, no one was hurt. When asked what had happened, I tried to show them the footage, but it was all gone. It was concluded to be a freak malfunction, but when I asked the head doctor about old Paulson, he paused and looked at me with wide-eyed horror. "Don't concern yourself with that old ghost story, Samuel," he said before wishing me a good night and leaving, but I knew there was something he wasn't telling me. "Kind regards, Samuel." Thank you for your testimony, Samuel. The spirits of the dead are drawn to reveal their own truth to the living. Perhaps there is more to old Paulson than meets the eye. Our next testimony comes from Gabriella in Vermont. Dear Timothy, my name is Gabriella, and I work for an end-of-life hospice. Palliative care is shied away from and not as talked about as it should be, but it is a vital part of maintaining dignity and comfort for those who are about to pass. The patients that my colleagues and I care for are old, frail, and sick. I've seen some of the patients leave this world so small and skinny that they barely weigh anything at all. However, a few weeks ago, I was left frightened by some of them in their final days. It started with a little old lady. She had no family with which to speak of. An only child with no kids of her own, she was seeing out her last days, bedridden in our care. One night, while I was on shift with a skeleton crew of nurses and orderlies, I heard the distress alarm sound from her room. I hurried over to see what was happening. This frail little lady, who barely weighed 80 pounds, was thrashing and kicking with all her might to get out of bed. "You won't take me, you won't take me," she screamed over and over. I tried calming her down, but she struck me so hard that I flew backwards. At that, some orderlies came in and restrained her. Even they were shocked by how strong she was and how hard she was kicking. She died a day later. I tried to work it out in my head, figuring that it must have been dementia, but it happened again. One of our male residents went batshit crazy one night while I was on shift. This time, it ended in tragedy. He'd gotten out of bed and ran down the hallway, screaming at us to get away from him. We tried our best to grab him before he reached the stairs, but when he did, he lost his footing and tumbled to his death. That was the hardest one to swallow, and after a week off to get my head straight, I was right back to it. It had just struck midnight when another distress alarm went off once more. I reached the room fully expecting the patient to be in the throes of a crazed rant, but they weren't. Instead, they just sat upright, staring into the corner. The old man turned to look at me and said, "You see it, don't you?" I entered the room and looked into the corner. A hooded figure carrying a scythe stood so tall it was hunched under the ceiling. "Oh my God," I screamed. "Don't be scared," the old man said, shushing me. "You'll scare him off, but he comes for us all eventually." The hooded figure approached the old man, and with a big, bony hand, he placed his finger gently on the old man's forehead. The old man gasped his last breath and then slumped back into his bed. I blinked, and the creature vanished. To this day, I don't know exactly what I saw, Timothy. The Grim Reaper, the boatman, the harbinger of death. What I do know is that there was no evil or malice in what I saw. It was nothing but pure, sorrowful death. Yours, Gabriella. Thank you for your testimony, Gabriella. Many legends from all over the world personify death. One thing that all humans have in common, though, is that we will eventually have our turn to meet it. Our final testimony of the evening comes from Jules in Salt Lake City. Dear Timothy, you can call me Jules. I've worked as a hospital orderly in Salt Lake City for most of my adult working life. Part of that job is taking deceased patients down to the morgue. The dead bodies have never bothered me before. They're dead and gone. All that's left is their earthly remains for me to take care of and handle respectfully. I had never touched their belongings before, but there was one night when that all changed. A John Doe had been brought in by the EMTs. He'd been in an accident, and unfortunately he didn't make it and died in the ER. With no ID and the only thing on him being a locked phone, I was tasked with moving him down into the morgue for identification. It was late, and the basement was deserted when I arrived. As I wheeled him towards the freezer, I heard his phone ring. It made me jump at first, but I just let it ring when I realized it was his. It's not my place to go answering a dead man's phone. It rang for a minute or so before it stopped, but then it rang again. It kept ringing and ringing. I thought of the poor person on the other end, trying desperately to reach them. I wasn't prepared to be the one to tell them that their loved one was dead and that I was answering their phone from the morgue. After a while, the phone stopped ringing and buzzed. I looked at the screen through the plastic bag and read the message. "Answer me, Jules," it said. My heart leapt with shock, and my skin crawled with tingling shock. Then the phone rang again. I looked down at the man and then back at the ringing phone in the bag. I carefully pulled out the phone and answered it. "Hello?" I said. A howling and hissing blasted into my ear before I started to hear some legible words. Dead," the voice said. "Hello? I'm sorry, I can't hear you," I said. Dead," the voice stammered in broken, garbled static. "I can't hear you," I repeated. "I'm dead, aren't I?" said the voice more clearly. I paused breathlessly. I stared down at the dead man on the gurney. "It's so cold. I can't see anything, Jules," said the voice on the phone. "How do you know my name?" I asked. "He told me," the voice responded. "Who told you?" I asked. There was a long pause. A wail and hiss of static pierced my ears again. "Him," the voice whimpered. "He's out here in the dark. I can feel him." "Who?" I asked again. "Oh God, please, no, please," the man on the phone wailed before the call was cut off. I tried to call the number back, but the phone died in my hands, and I couldn't get it to turn back on. I shook my head, put the man in the freezer, and tried my best to forget everything I'd heard. But how can you forget that Timothy? How can you forget a dead man's final words screamed into your ear? How can you forget that fear? Yours, Jules. Thank you for that harrowing testimony, Jules. Death is a natural part of all life, even when that death might not have come about through natural means. The spirit world knows this, and it can be frightening when confronted with things we do not understand or are not fully prepared for. This concludes the evening's ghostly broadcast, Paranormal Station. If you enjoyed this broadcast and want to be notified when our next broadcasts are live, consider a like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. It supports our work to bring you testimonies from around the world documenting the supernatural. If you have any testimonies of your own brushes with the supernatural, get in touch in the comments. I am always in search of contributors to catalog their experiences of the paranormal. Stay safe in the night, listeners. When the witching hours draw near, guard yourselves well from the spirits lurking.